Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. A note is just a note, right? Well, no, not when it's in a chord. Notes do different jobs depending on where they live in a chord. Today we're going to take a look at the Elton John classic, Your Song. Well, at least we're going to use it as a springboard to talk about how notes live within chords and chord progressions. Well, let's take a look. A couple days ago, a student brought in the Elton John song, Your Song. They were working on it from the point of view of playing piano, maybe singing it. But as we looked at the chord progression and talked about how the melody worked, they turned to me and said, "So how do you write a melody like that?" Well, the Elton John song, Your Song, uses a unique approach. There's a steady, even vector melodically. It's just kind of like a line that lives in one place. In the case of the Elton John song, it's around the third of the tonic chord. And that note becomes something different depending on how the chords shift under it. Let's take a look at it on the screen. Well, we're not going to play the song because, copyright. But I've written the chords out in the key of C or something close to them. C major with an E on top, and then F major 7 with an E on top. The D is the 5th, and then it's the 7th. Now it's the 5th of A minor, the 5th of A minor 7, and the 5th of this cool A minor, which is something else. And then now it's a major 7th again. Down a step to D. It's on the G chord. It's the same as before. E lives as a 5th, E lives as a 5th with a dominant sound, E lives as a 9th, E lives as a 13th, and just because I'm a little perverse, I resolved to a C chord but with a 9th on top. Let's play this a little bit slower and talk our way through it. Maybe I'll play it on piano. So, the very first tone on top, the E, is going to be the vocal melody. And then the major 7 is so sweet. It's the same tone on top. And that dissonance, the E, has been prepared by the sweetness of the major third. Let's go on. Now we're at a 5 chord, the G chord. So we drop a step. And that D keeps living there and becomes the 7th of E7. I have added the chords up on top. I'll just point that out to you for those of you following along at home. E7 is the 5 of what? A minor. And now we're going to walk down in classic 70s, early 80s chord progression fashion. That's an E on the top of every one of those chords. I love that. E on top, E on top. This isn't exactly functional harmony, but there's something going on that we call a line cliche. We've talked about that before. Now a D on top, it's the 5th of G. And then this beautiful voicing here, E7 chord. And this is a secondary dominant. E is the 5 of A minor. It's happened once before in this very short progression. Here it's happening again. E is the 5 of A minor. And sure, the next thing that happens is A minor 7. And I turned this A minor 7 into A dominant 7 over a C sharp. Why? Because A is the 5 of, you guessed it, the next chord, D. D minor 9. These are basically jazz voicings, because why not? You may be thinking, sure, that's fine in chord voicings, but what about a melody? Well, I added a few melodies, and we're going to take a look at 3 different places where this simple little 2-step figure can live within the chord progression and still kind of sound great. Here's the sort of the original. course, isn't the specific melody that Elton John wrote. That rhythmic figure that I'm using is called an isorhythm, and it helps knit things together, doesn't it? Again, just an E and a D. Super singable. I've got only 5 or 6 decent tones in my singing voice, and so I could sing the song if I put it in the right key. There are examples of this in the jazz literature as well. One-note samba has a bunch of chord changes in the verse, but the pitch is just one tone. It switches to another tone when it modulates. All right, I thought to myself, well, maybe I can do this in a different location in the chord. Remember before our melody tone was the third of the one chord? It was an E. Well, I said, well, let's make that basic melodic axis A to G instead of E to D. It's going to sound the same but different. Here we go. Right here, I had to make a tiny adjustment to G sharp because of the E7 chord. I hope you'll forgive me, but it worked great. Now, this isn't a harmony to the melody. This is a whole second melody. It's a different approach to melodicizing this chord progression. It's exactly the same rhythm. I just copied the line and made some tiny adjustments. We can do the same thing again. Now, where's the melodic axis? Well, here's the first tone. It's a D, the 9th of the one chord. Ooh, this ought to be interesting. And it's going to drop down again. You know what? This one is my favorite. I'll just tell you up front. Ninths are working great in contemporary popular music. I know you know this already. That D is weird against the C sharp, but I think it's okay. I'm going to leave it there. When you're melodicizing a chord progression, you've got a lot of options. Chord tones, obviously. Non-chord tones. Non-chord tones may well be out of the scale, and they can be a little bit tricky. But if you set yourself the idea of a vector, and in this case, our vector was a straight line. Another melodic vector might be ascending and then descending. That's a classic one, right? Or a series of ascents, followed perhaps by a descent. Set yourself a melodic vector and then place your melody within the first chord and see what happens as you move. Don't be afraid of momentary dissonances against your chord progression. Now, we've picked a great chord progression, kind of lifted from Elton John's Your Song, but even a 4-chord cycle is going to give you interesting results. Well, I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.